And we've got 7 awesome whiskeys to go through. Hopefully you've poured them out. You're letting them have a little breather before we get rolling here. We will, as always, do a speed round. So we'll go through them once together, take our time, see how they're doing, talk about them a little bit. And then at the end, we'll come back and just see how they are doing. But we are going to start off with the King of Scots blend, which came out last year. This is a 75th anniversary release for Douglas Lang, the blender and independent bottler. For a 50-year-old whiskey at north of, I believe it's 46%. The price is, not terrible, I guess would be the best way to put it. I mean, nothing's cheap anymore when it comes to rare and old whiskey, but certainly we don't see a lot of stuff, even grains in the 50-year range anymore with reasonable prices. So this is a bit of a curiosity. I remember I tried this in Paris, but that was a blur. So we'll be approaching this fresh tonight, and hoping to write up a tasting note on this at some point too, because it's just kind of fun to dive into and sample older whiskeys. And one other note about this, I suppose, worth mentioning, that Carol Lang has taken over Douglas Lang. She's pushed her daddy out of the way. He's been sent off to pasture and into retirement.
I feel like Fred's going to be around regardless, though. He's such a character.
He is such a character. And I mean, if you have a waxed mustache, you do need to share that with people. So that's a factor as well there too. Well, let's dive in on the nose on this. For me, like, there's something kind of unusual about it. Like, there's something that reminds me of almost like old bourbon in it. Like, maybe it's American oak, but there's like this spice, oily thing I can't quite put my finger on.
Yeah, there's like a butterscotch note for me almost that comes through that I get with like old, beautiful, antique grain almost. I know we don't know the proportions. I'm assuming do we know if this has got any malt in it or not? It just says blended scotch.
I believe it does. What does the description say? It This momentous King of Scots 50-year-old holds historic importance, yada, yada, yada. They just dance around it. It doesn't say anything, but I've got to imagine that they wouldn't do this with just grain. And if you think about some of the older stuff we've seen from the different Lang branches of the family, like, I would not be surprised if this is old grain in Glenfarclas, or probably Speyside's finest, would be my suspicion.
Wow.
But it's starting, like, it's quite fruity. It does have some of those nice old grain tones. Like, I think it's starting to go tropical, but there's like quite a like sort of almost a salted caramel tone to it too.
Yeah, I'm getting like some like almost like apricots and sort of like an apricot flan. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Lots of white fruit, so like kind of like tart tatin or like, baked apple. Oh, maybe it's going exotic. Anyway, it's not often that we do tastings anymore with whiskeys that are older than I am, so that's kind of fun. Let's give it a taste. So Phil and Suzanne were in a master class in Calgary where they poured this whiskey, and the additional information provided was Blair Athol and Glenfarclas. So there you go. I got one of them right.
Wow, old Glenfarclas. That's amazing.
Well, I've got one here. Like, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, like, this is the sort of stuff that they used to release all the time. Probably Speyside's finest distillery. Probably can't read that easily. Everyone knows that's a euphemism for Glenfarclas, but like, this one here is 1966. They had a lot of late 60s Glenfarclas between the two branches of the company, and maybe that had something to do with why they used it, but they also can't call it Glenfarclas, so maybe it's just as worthy or useful for them to put it in a blend. Who knows? Sammy, did you want to share? Do you have any thoughts on this one? You're muted if, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for me, it smell like, a fruit tart or frank. Yeah, just like, what Doug said. Yeah.
Um,
And yeah, for me, it smell like, some kind of like, old wood. I don't know exactly what it is, like a wood furniture
mhm.
to me. Yeah.
It's definitely quite woody. Um, that's for sure. Like, and I mean, that's not surprising for something of this age. Like, even a lot of those old grains, as nice as they could be, like often would start to get like a bitter astringency, especially on the finish. But yeah, it's got a nice balance to it. I don't know what I was expecting from this because clearly we needed to consult Jerry Zhang and Phil and Suzanne to know what was actually in this whiskey because the interweb doesn't provide much detail. But it's good. It's nice. I mean,
Yeah, it's interesting. The 50-50 splits between malt and grain certainly makes sense. The Blair Thal's kind of a bit more of an outlier for me in terms of how that got into the mix. But again, with the stocks that the Lang families had going back a couple generations, I'm sure they've got some pretty amazing stuff in their warehouse.
well, you'd think so, but then the 75th anniversary releases, and I don't know if you saw what Douglas Lang put out, but I would imagine even some of these companies don't have as much old stuff anymore. And you look at the Hunter Lang side of it, and granted, they've had a decent amount of Isla, but none of it over really 30, 35 years anymore. There's very little that's getting bottled. So I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe this just was liquid that they felt was better in a blend than bottled as a single malt.
Yeah, I think James makes a really good point where they probably blended a couple of casks together. There was the one note about one very, very sherried, one going into the mix, which certainly would make a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, James, being just a participant, is able to maybe make illusions that some of the rest of us have to dance around. I don't know why I say that. I usually don't hide from opinions on that. But yeah, it's a nice blend. It's interesting for 50-year-old. You're not going to find anything better value unless you want cognac. So, um, yeah,
Or Armagnac.
or Armagnac. Good point, Sammy. How could we forget Armagnac? But the grain really comes through in it for me. Like I often see this in like having like a rum-like profile to it, and for whatever reason, grain whiskey and rum whiskey or rum whiskey, grain whiskey and rums, older rums seem to have like some similarities.
Especially some of the old like British style rums that are using pot stills with
Mhm.
it. Jamaica or Demerara. This kind of reminds me of an old Demerara rum from back in the day, which can be quite lovely.
Yeah, there you go. Lars says it's spectacular. He loves it. Um, and what did Richard say? Something to do with G&M family cast drinks at Christmas, and Richard drinks Speyside Brewery when he's home. Okay, well there you go. I'm sure there's side chats going down rabbit holes. We were talking about this before. I need to have AI monitoring the chat for me and highlighting not the side conversations but the main comments. But that's for another tasting. So, uh, cool. Well, why don't we move on to the Bunnahabhain? We're staying with Hunter Lang in this case. Now, this does say out of stock on our website, but there is a chance we still have it or can still get it. I'd have to have a look here, but this is the XOP Bunnahabhain 35-year Year of the Dragon bottling. So if any of you were looking for a Year of the Dragon release, 35 years bottled at 40.2% from a single sherry butt. Now, once again, I think we're talking here about something that needed to be bottled before it was no longer legally whiskey anymore, especially if it's down at 40.2%. But I know, Doug, when we were first getting started here, you were commenting on how tropical, or not, you didn't use those words, but just how beautiful the nose was,
Yeah.
and
It's
how it
it's
really stood out.
It's so fruity and like reminds me of like overripe pears, like in the best possible way. And some peaches, and I could get lost for an afternoon in this nose alone.
Well, this reminds me a lot of those 43, 44 single malts of Scotland, bottlings of Bunnahabhain under the director's cut, and even a little bit of the Port Askeg 45, which was another Bunnahabhain. Because yeah, it is there's like a lot of sort of caramel and there's just lots and lots of fruits going quite exotic. Oranges, mangoes, even those little banana candies, for some reason, I'm getting those on the nose here too. Sammy, what are you getting?
I got like pear, a little bit of like apricot, yeah. Probably like candy orange, yeah, a bit more like orange.
Oh,
Uh, it's almost like fresh gummy worms.
oh
Remember
yeah.
remember the old days where you could go in with a couple pennies and stick your hand in a giant box full of candies that you never know what you're going to get out of it, and just the freshest and best ones were lovely. The 40.2% starts to come through on the palate. It's so soft and delicate, it feels like,
Mm-hmm.
and very gracious for its age.
Graceful. I'm multitasking here. I'm logging in to see if this is something we can still get or not. Because I'm sure there's someone out there who wants to know 899-253. I'm just digging it up in the catalog.
See, this is what you need AI for.
Hmm.
AI just to look this stuff up and pull it in real time.
Well, it's true, but I don't know if I want to give it my password or authentication keys in case, well, who knows? Something could go sideways there potentially. Yeah, the palate, I agree. Like you're starting to see it's a little bit on the weak side from it. The flavors are nice. Um, but this is a really like I would almost even describe sort of as a fragile whiskey. Like I don't think you could add water to this. I think it would completely fall apart if you did.
I mean, this nose is just so spectacular though for me.
Mhm.
It would be amazing to have been able to try this as it progressed through its age at sort of 20, 25, 30, 35 years old.
Yeah. Lots of fruits, like jelly beans, jelly bellies, some of those exotic fruit flavors. It's very soft and it's elegant. The interesting comparison for me between the first one and this one is the first one just felt a little uneven. Like, I don't know, it wasn't maybe a cohesive blend. Obviously, this is a single cast, so it's something altogether different. But to your point before about it being kind of, elegant, it's definitely got a nice elegance to it. Very light, fresh, and fruity. Sammy, what do you think?
Yeah, for me, like passion fruit, yeah,
Mhm.
something a little bit like a more exotic. Uh, yeah, I can't like a pear,
Mhm.
like a dry pear or dehydrated pear.
Yeah. There's some interesting notes in the runts. James is saying is a good call. Fisherman's friend, like there's definitely kind of a freshness to it, like a fisherman's friend cough drop. Um, funkiness Luke has added in there. I love this tasting note from Stefan, a veneer of soft leather and oats. The oats is an interesting addition to that. Like, are the oats in the soft leather? Um, is it a yin and yang? And Jerry saying he likes it better, whereas Lars saying very subtle and soft compared to the King of Scots. So interesting there, like two different, very different styles of whiskey right off the bat for something a little older. Vegan or leather, or
Vegan.
vegan oat leather. There you go. That's the translation. So I'm sure that's a thing that exists.
If
Uh, sorry,
if not, it's $1 million idea right there.
it
Go
could
ahead.
be $1 million idea. Well, I have a friend who's making oat milk chocolate, and Hershey just started selling oat milk chocolate. So who knows? He was on the leading edge, but he didn't get bought out. So who knows what will happen there. All right, Mosstowie. Mosstowie, Doug, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this. Milton Duff, Lomond Still, made, I believe, only until like it was either the early 80s or late 70s, but only for about a 8 or 9 year window.
Yeah, it was in around, I think Glenburgie, its sister distillery, had it around the same time. They pulled it out sort of 82, 83, right around the sort of last big whiskey crash.
So for those who don't know, Lomond Stills were developed so that a distillery could create different styles with its existing stills or without changing stills or having the need for multiple stills. And you would do this by manipulating plates in the neck. These stills turned out to be notoriously difficult to clean and maintain. So most distilleries got rid of them. I believe the only one that still has a version of them is Loch Lomond, whom the stills are named for. Or is there?
Yeah, Scapa has one.
That's right.
Other distillery, sister distillery to Milton Duff, and then Bruichladdich has Inverleven's old Lomond Still, but they've taken all the plates out and only use it for gin. Call it a Betty.
And interesting side story on that. They make more money off their gin than they do their whiskey, and they only distill a concentrate for it 3 times a year. Like, just wrap your head around that. That's how profitable the Botanist gin has been for them. So this is a whiskey sponge bottling. It's a pretty fierce looking label. 1979 vintage, the year after the greatest vintage in history. 42.9%, bottled at 42 after 42 years from a refill barrel. There's almost certainly something in the tasting note explaining the label, but this was a bit of a surprise release to see from Whiskey Sponge that they were getting anything kind of this old. Obviously, they got it from Signatory. They've done a lot of work with Signatory, and I think that's where a ton of their bottlings have come from. But what do we think? What do we think about this?
I mean, there's a creaminess and almost like a honeyed note that almost reminds me of like a Glenfarclas, or rather a Clynelish, rather.
Yeah, there's like a bit of a waxiness to it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like that creaminess to me is sort of almost like a yogurt, like a Greek yogurt or something, but maybe with a bit of honey drizzled into it. Some fruits, because it's both creamy, but also there's a tartness to it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also got a little bit of like floral nose to it and mint.
Yeah. The official tasting notes on this, just he's talking about lots of rancio, cigar humidor, walnut oil, and prune eau de vie, and then giving way to lighter fruity notes. Yeah, it's. I mean, to me, this has got, if not the prettiest nose, it's the combination of like both like beautiful characteristics, but also it's got a nice weight to it. It's got a nice presence. It doesn't feel 42.9% for me on the nose.
Yeah, another one of these that just really big nose, so complex. You can spend a lot of time going through and pulling out stuff. And then on the palate again, a little bit more delicate, probably a bit more oomph than the Bunna, but still.
Yeah, the fruits are mostly kind of citrus orchard, but there's a lot of them. They're big, they're creamy, tons of honey, and that floral note that you talked about on the nose, Sammy, that's really there too.
Oh, wow. Luke having a 79 before the tasting, a GFFC, so I'm assuming that's a Glenfarclas family cask, 1979.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely stuff.
Well, and those were some of those glorious supposedly fourth fill casks that were quite tropical and not typically Glenfarclas over the top. But yeah, some interesting notes on this. Like, you can definitely start to feel more of its age on the palate. Like it feels to me like it's starting to get like into some of those sort of bitter coffee tones towards the finish. Still very drinkable, very pleasant.
Wow.
Sammy, you got anything else to add on this one?
Yeah, I on the palate I actually what taste like green apple.
Mm.
Yeah, at the beginning, and then
Hmm.
turn into like some coffee bitter taste.
A little bit of like Jolly, like green Jolly Rancher, maybe.
Uh, I think it's more like a Granny Smith, like like fresh apple.
Hmm.
Yeah. Why I eat actually Granny Smith, once in a while, not all the time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, it's a whiskey, I've probably only had the chance to try like 5 or 6 times. You don't see a ton of it. We're seeing less and less of it now. Yeah, just something kind of fun, something a little different. And yeah, we're not seeing a lot of whiskeys from the 70s at approachable prices anymore. And fair enough, because they've been bottling them for the last 30, 40 years, and there's less and less to go around every single year. Um, Lovely, cool. Speaking of 79, though, we have another 79 to try here. So kind of cool to be able to do two of those in a lineup. This one is bucks that trend. It's, you know, just a shade over $1,000. So, for yeah, a 1979 vintage whiskey, pretty decent price. Um, yeah, 80s. I know I saw James comment there about the 80s. The 80s are early 80s are dreadful. Just given the fact that the industry was starting to go through some difficult times and didn't produce as much. And then a lot of what was produced ended up getting bottled in the 90s and 2000s. So even distilleries like Glenfarclas don't have much left from certain years like 83, 84. So this is what we're on to now, the Tamnavulin 1979. It's part of a core range that was released, I think about 2 years ago. It took a little longer to find its way to our market here. Um, and they just kind of mysteriously appeared in the catalog one day. Like no one told us about them. 46.5%, combination of first fill sherry and ex-bourbon, initially matured in bourbon, and then put into, and this is classic White and Mackay Richard Patterson technique, to 30-year-old Methuselah Oloroso sherry butts before being put back into bourbon. So it was bourbon, sherry, bourbon. Total 39 years of maturation on this. I believe Richard calls that the Methuselah sherry finesse. And I guess you don't want to give too much finesse. So you would back it off by going back to the bourbon to keep it under control.
the sherry sandwich, so to speak.
Sherry sandwich, yeah. The bourbon sherry bourbon Oreo.
I mean, it's got a beautiful chocolatey nose on it. It feels like.
Mhm.
I know Jerry's got some pretty strong opinions about this being a pretty lovely dram, or his favorite of the evening. For me, it's actually interesting to go back and nose the first one, the 50-year-old, where you've got a really interesting dynamic of sherry. Get a bit more of the grain in the 50-year-old, but again, both big sherry whiskeys in their own way.
Yeah, there's some nice chocolate tones to this, like kind of, well, quite rich sherry tones as well. Like there's a lot of dark fruit. It's quite syrupy. Loads of chocolate. Um, I don't know. I like it. I can't help but wonder how nice it might have been if it had just stayed in bourbon for 39 years. And can't help but think that maybe it might have been better.
I mean, this is kind of where we're at right now in the industry, where there's so many of these finishings going on right now, and
Mhm.
certainly difficult to find beautiful sherry whiskeys that are dark and of age. But yeah, your point is a very valid one.
Sammy, what do you think about this?
I actually quite enjoy it. Yeah, it is got a lot of dark fruit, chocolate,
Mhm.
and Yeah, a little bit leathery too.
Yeah. There's definitely some licorice tobacco, some of those classic tones coming through there. Luke saying the nose is amazing, winner for him so far. Um, for me, I was just starting to notice like really some really earthy, leathery tones on the finish. Incidentally, if you haven't tried this, the single malts of Scotland 31-year-old Glenrothes. I know we were talking about old sherry. This is a knockout. I was worried I was going to hate it because sherry and Glenrothes for me is triggering. Almost need like a trigger warning with like heavily sherried Glenrothes because I've had so much bad sulfur sherried Glenrothes, but that was good. I like it. I can see why people like it. It's got quite a bit of licorice in there too, but I don't know, I'm kind of struggling with it. And I think maybe it's partly biased because don't hold certain other White Mackay distilleries in high regard that Methuselah sherry finesse their whiskeys. But it seems to lack subtlety to me, and it seems to lack complexity.
I think again, there's an underlying note of almost like an apple pie crust for me, a little bit of like cinnamon and sort of breadiness there.
Mhm.
But again, it's so hard to get some of that underlying notes. And with the color of the cask, I'm assuming not only is it sherry, it's probably European oak,
Mhm.
which just adds in some of those nutty notes, which again, it's pretty easy to swallow up that old distillate after that much time.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we look at how they described it, I mean, these weren't sherry seasoned casks. Like these were actually like Methuselah Solera, 30-year Solera sherry casks, which are great casks. I mean, not criticizing them for using that. It just kind of seems to me funny to take it and then glob it on at the end of the process. And then, but you have to sell enough whiskey to pay for Richard's watches and ties. So it's, yeah. And to be fair, this is pretty reasonable. I guess that's the other comment that should be said. Like for an almost 40-year-old distillery bottling, like this is frankly inexpensive compared to everything else that's out there. So, um,
And a slight Canadian connection that we were chatting about before. I think now
yeah.
that the former Shelter Point distiller Leon is over helping run things at Tamnavulin these days, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, and I think you mentioned you're gonna see him at some point or this year, so possibly maybe.
Heading over for the Spirit of Speyside Festival here
Yeah.
in over a month's time. So hoping to run into him there because they don't usually have the distillery open, but they are opening it up for tours during the festival, which is exciting.
Oh, that's cool. Um, yeah. Well, let's move on to the Gordon MacPhail offering that we have in tonight's tasting. Um, I would say the 279s in this were the initial reasons why I wanted to put this tasting on, and then realized that 50-year-old and a few other things made for nice additions to the lineup. But yeah, we are on to the 1983 Glenburgie from Gordon MacPhail. This was a recent arrival, hasn't been in the market for too long. 38 years old, 45.2%, matured in a refill American oak hogshead, which is interesting because this does have uh, a bit of color to it, but then when you go to nose it, it's definitely more in that American oak uh, realm than the sherried realm. And I don't know, maybe this should have been earlier in the lineup. I don't know if I think I'll be honest, like Evan and I were talking lineup earlier in the week, and I think I just assumed it must be refill sherry. So I looked at the color, put it later in the lineup. I think the nose still stacks up quite nicely, but had I clued into this being ex bourbon, I think I would have slotted it at the very least ahead of the Tamnavulin.
Oh, this is another beautiful old nose, though.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very large soft spot, a lovely Glenburgie.
One trying to think other than Gordon MacPhail, like you don't see too many old bottlings of Glenburgie. So, I know they've done like James would probably know better than anyone. They've done some old ones like 67s, but you know, this is a pretty old whiskey from this distillery, but this is that style that, you know, I think is pretty well known now that I'm a huge fan of. Refill ex-bourbon, long maturation. And the nose on this is like, it's just packed with tropical fruits and cream and honey.
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful whiskey right
Some
there.
wine rooms. Doug, anything else you to add to that nose wise on there for you?
Yeah. It's just so fruity and creamy.
Mhm.
There's just this lovely underlying sort of citrus note to it.
Oh man, as good as the nose is, the palate's even better. Sammy, what do you think? Are you still nosing it, or have you already tasted it?
I taste a little bit already. It's actually quite refreshing in a way after the sherry cask. Yeah. Yeah, I taste the same. I have a little bit like a citrus, like a taste of finish at the end, and kind of like a lemon meringue pie.
It's so thick and it's so syrupy, like and fruity, like it's like agave nectar drizzled on top of fruit. Maybe with a little side of whipped cream. Like it is just, it's lush. It's just like the nose, lush, creamy, very fruity. Some nice spices towards the finish too. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, it's not really a surprise, I have to say.
Well, it's interesting because so many of the Glenburgies that Gordon MacPhail, the old ones that they've been releasing lately, had been those big sherry bombs. I know
Mhm,
at a G&M tasting a year or two back,
mhm,
where there were two massive sherry bombs in there. And this is just so much the opposite of
mhm.
just that beautiful underlying distillate.
Yeah, one of them was that 67 archive release bottling that's quite sherried, which to be honest, when I first tried it, I thought, oh, it's too sherried, but it needed time. It opened up. And I know when we did that tasting, it was a hit. Like it's really tropical, old school sherry. But yeah, this is a very different twist on that floral, fruity, delicate. But surprisingly, it's got quite a weight to it and a presence for refill ex bourbon, especially given some of the things that we've had in this lineup.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful whiskey so far, though.
Mhm.
Really interesting range of stuff. Some,
No, no huge surprise there though. I mean,
yeah.
like when you see these rare old gems now, like I don't know, it's cool to be able to try these because you know for the longest time a lot of these old and rare bottles get bought and you wonder what happens to them and where they go and will they ever be opened. Um, so nice to be able to try them. Sammy, any other comments on this one?
Uh, no, I actually quite enjoy it. Yeah, I mean like the last few years I've tried so many like sherry cask finish, and this is actually I would love always like going back to bourbon so I can actually taste the base spirit itself. Yeah, the Glenburgie is actually is a really good like a whiskey. Yeah,
Mhm.
so far I haven't really had that one for the last few years. All the Glenburgie I ever tried.
Yeah. Well, it's, along with Mosstowie, which is Milton Duff, Glenburgie is one of those Pernod Ricard distilleries that's kind of the core trio behind the Ballantine's blend, along with Glen Talkers. And I think probably the best thing that happened to whiskey nerds is that those whiskeys were never brought to the fore as single malts. They always remained like these key components for blending because a lot of it got filled into just ex bourbon or refill ex bourbon and it was just left to mature and no one mucked around with it. And yeah, and I think Doug, I don't know if you've been to any of those. Like it's on my list. I know Richard Urquhart's promised that he'll hook me up if I'd like to go over and visit some of those distilleries. But yeah,
And
because they're not there for tourists. Like they're just purely workhorses.
yeah, Glenburgie opened up a couple years ago for another Spirit of the Space side that I got to go and visit and hang out with the distillery manager and go on tour. And they completely tore down the entire distillery, I think, in around 2002 and rebuilt it. And then a couple years afterwards, doubled the production. So this is truly a different distillery and time for Glenburgie in many regards. And then they also had a Lowman still, and they called their Lowman still Glen Craig.
So yeah, 2004 refurbishment. So did the distillery manager even say that the post 2004 stuff is different? Like,
No, they had I think they had two of the four stills were original that were brought over from the last distillery.
mhm,
But it's really interesting. He just spent a lot of time actually bragging about how most distilleries, if you're looking for a super fruity sort of distillate, which Glenburgie for me is one of the fruitiest in Scotland,
mhm.
generally you're looking for like a really clear wort to your beer that you're making before you distill it. Glenburgie is actually one of the haziest worts
Hmm.
in distilling, which I always stuck with me for whatever reason. But
It's it's the NEPA of
that's it.
there
It's
you go.
hazy still hot, or is hazy coming off?
I think hazy is overdone. I think it's time that it needs to be settled down. We need to go back to, well, the classic West Coast IPA. But the world needs more of that and less of the hazy. But that's just my personal opinion. I just don't want any more heartburn. It's too much heartburn. So
Wow.
less IPAs is what Jeff says. All right. Now to the two youngest whiskeys in the lineup. A bit of a transition, but we had to balance things out a little bit on this one too. They're still old. Everything in this lineup's over 30 years of age. So yeah, next up is the Mythical Beasts Bruichladdich. I love older Bruichladdich, so I think I was excited to get this into a lineup and try it regardless. And I think this is an appropriate whiskey for a lineup like this. It's within, you know, 40% age of the oldest whiskey in the lineup. So close enough. So what have we got here? 53.3% ex-bourbon. Oh, no, sorry. It says they didn't specify. This is one of those ones you got to love it where it just says matured in oak casks, which has got to be the most useless descriptor because everything has to be matured in oak casks. I don't know if there is something more clear on the bottle. No, just from cask number. But I think we assumed based on the color and the tasting notes that it was probably ex-bourbon. So what do we think of this? This is Jerry saying he thinks it's peated. And it's less than 1K. So, well, hey, we had to have one bargain whiskey in the lineup tonight, Jeff. It'd be cool to know what year this was distilled in too. Like, it's got to be early 90s at the very least.
Well, and back then they were only producing haphazardly, I think, weren't they? Right before they shut down.
Yeah, the 90s, there was very intermittent production, fair bit of 92, some 1990, some 96 and 98 as well. But then there's other years where there wasn't any production.
Interesting.
Just telling Mark Renier to fuck off when he rode his bike past the entrance, as the story he tells
And the
goes.
story of every January writing a letter for a decade to them, asking
Yeah.
if he could buy the distillery. And interestingly, they shut down Bruichladdich because Jura had a renovation 2 years after Bruichladdich. So they kept Jura open because it was more modern, and ultimately shut down Bruichladdich.
Well, yeah, because Jura was reopened in the 60s and was relatively new and larger capacity too, not just because of the shape of its stills, which are huge, but yeah. The nose on this I find a little shy. Like there's some nice honey in there. There's a bit of fruit, wine gums, leaning more in that citrus realm, and a bit of salt. But I'm also again kind of starting to go in that yogurt direction with this.
Yeah, that really feels like that needs some time, just to oxidize a little bit and reveal itself a little bit more.
But I am starting to wonder about Jerry's comment about the peat because I don't think they were intentionally peating, like their whiskey, in that period in time. So I don't know, is it barrel char?
Well,
Because there's something vaguely smoky going on there, but
you have to think about where they would be getting their malt from at that time, right? And generally, Bruichladdich is one of the very few on the island that goes outside of Port Ellen maltings historically. But if they were only doing haphazard production runs, they might have got some low peated barley from Port Ellen, maybe. Like I'm just trying to think how else.
yeah, lots of vanilla, lots of honey, a bit of like citrus and white fruit, but not, nothing too exotic. It does remind me of like a little bit of honeycomb on top of like, I don't know, maybe some Comté, like a grassier cheese. Sammy, what are you getting with this?
Yeah, I got like honey, a little bit of nut, something a little bit lighter, like almond, and like a little bit citrusy, a little bit grassy, yeah, on the palate at the end.
The legs on it are crazy. I don't know if you can see, but there's a ton of oiliness on the side, unlike any other dram I think we've had tonight.
Well, this is the first one to push north of 50, so not too surprising there. This is growing on me. It's a lovely style of whiskey. I think it's kind of up against some difficult competition. Like almost everything else has a decade on it at least. And that's not an easy place to be fighting from.
I don't know much about the Mythical Beasts line. I've seen a couple of releases from them, but do you have any more details on them at all?
No, these are the kind of this is one of those things where we were offered some stock after we kind of complained because we didn't get offered some. I have a feeling this is one of those new independent bottlers that's come out in the last couple of years that might be tied into investing in, you know, so there's not a lot out there on these guys. They don't have, they don't have any younger stuff. So I don't know, but I mean, you've seen it like a lot of other people here have seen it. There's been just an incredible proliferation of these companies, a good chunk of whom probably won't be around in a few years' time, especially if they've been buying casks over the last year at market prices. That's going to be a difficult transition back to normal. But yeah, it's an unusual independent baller, and we were offered the chance to bring in a couple of them, and that's what we did. You know, presumably ex-bourbon 30-year-old Bruichladdich seemed like a pretty safe bet. The next one I'm interested, but also a little bit terrified because it is 34-year-old Glenrothes from Sherry. I did want to say, Stefan, I always love some of your notes. These always get sweeter and rounder with time, just like me. You gotta love comments like that. Frederica, honey fennel, and Dutch almond cake. You would know about the Dutch almond cake, I have no doubt, Frederica. And yeah, it comes over a bit bland after that incredible Glenburgie. Tough act to follow indeed. And then Jeff says, but there was a report that Cask Investments, something, I don't know why I can't read all of it, made mega returns. Was that a report on Instagram sponsored as a post? I don't know either way, just asking the question. So let's dive in while Jeff is replying to said post. We've got a big Glenrothes here. 42% Oloroso sherry. So we do know in this case it's Oloroso sherry. And it's 34 years old and less than the OB Glenrothes 25-year-old of present. So that's saying something in this environment. I still haven't even nosed this, Doug. What are you getting on the nose?
I'm sorry. I took a sip of this and it floored me, I have to admit. Just beautiful old sherry. And you always wonder about Glenrothes because they Edrington often put into cask at much higher strength, like 69%. So older stuff, especially in Oloroso, can really strip out a lot of those tannins, but this is actually a bit more A little bit more muted on the nose, but the for me, the palate, it just sings from beautiful old style sherry.
Yeah, well, the nose has that old style sherry to it. It's got like that soft chocolate leather tobacco combo, maybe that old school grandma's Christmas cake. Um, even like cola cubes on the nose. Like the sherry's big, but it's not over the top.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's just an older style of unseasoned cask, where there's just a creaminess to the Oloroso that's just lovely.
Oh, that reminds me of like old. So it's like this single malts of Scotland one. It reminds me of old like 70s Glendronach from 15 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite pretty. And I hate to say it as a comparison with the Tamnavulin, but it's more elegant. It doesn't seem kind of as forced and gloopy, would be the word that's in my mind for this one. Sammy, thoughts, comments?
On the nose, all I can smell is just like no sherry. I cannot smell anything else. Yeah, on the palate, it's like chocolate, leather, dark fruit for me. Yeah.
Man.
Wow.
Dave Smith saying movie pitch, Glengarry, Glenrothes. Salesman try to sell sherry Glenrothes to Andrew without letting him try it first. That would have to be a pretty damn good salesman, I have to say.
Well, to be fair, Andrew, for one of your anniversaries, I think 5 or 6 years ago, you did in fact bottle a 19-year-old sherry bomb Glenrothes that did you actually taste it ahead of time?
No, but my friend Thomas vouched for it, so I took a chance on it. So I trusted Thomas would not tee us up with a donkey in that case, and he didn't. So that thing was ridiculous. Like it was so syrupy and so thick and so much cola cube over the top. James, I suppose the qualifier in your case would be if it's Gordon MacPhail sherry, I'm probably going to be an easier sell, but still not a cask. I don't think you could ever convince me unless the price was over the top ridiculously good, which challenge accepted. So, yeah, this is it's nice. I like this. I mean, I'm kind of increasingly not a big sherry fan because the modern sherry whiskeys I don't love, but this is a style of sherry whiskey that I really dig. Jerry's saying thinner at the end than the Glendronachs. That might be a bit fair. And lingering expectorant cough syrup on the finish for me. Now that is a doctor's tasting note, if ever I've seen one. That's the stuff that you need to get like a prescription for, right? That to help you empty your lungs of mucus. Yeah. Wow. All right. Are we ready to go and do the speed round? Just see how things have evolved.
Oh,
Pull no punches.
this is going to be
So
fascinating having back to a couple of them already just on the nose.
this is still the 50-year-old is still so bourbony to me. Like it just reminds me of like really spicy bourbon on the nose, like old bourbon. It tastes mostly of grain now. Like it's super grain dominant, very sugary, very syrupy, some nice fruits, but also reminds me of rum. It also kind of feels a little bit like it's falling apart. Doug?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of the higher ABVs that we've had tonight, right? It's still only 46%.
Mm-hmm.
But it's big. I think it's that note, and I can't remember who said it, where there was one ultra sherry bomb probably blended into this
Mm-hmm.
that to try and balance it out certainly makes a ton of sense to me. It's a great dram. It's just up against some very stiff competition tonight.
Yeah. Sammy?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it tastes like a little bit like syrupy now. Yeah, that's all I can taste.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't really taste the whiskey anymore.
Yeah. Okay. The Bunnahabhain 35, which was a strong contender in the old school complex department starting off. How is it holding up?
You know, it's interesting. There's almost a slightly floral note that's coming in now on the palate for me. That kind of reminds me of like you know, a bottle that's been sitting on the shelf for a couple of decades where there's just a little bit of that sort of floral. I don't know how else to describe it.
No, I can see that it's definitely floral, but it has that that property that Compass Box introduced us to of Velacor on this, of like the sort of the sense and the feel of dusty old books. So it has an old school feel to it, which I like in an older whiskey. So I'm digging it. Sammy?
Yeah, yeah, I smell like, quite a bit of like a lot of like, perfume, like a floral perfume on the
Mhm.
nose.
Yeah.
Yeah, the taste, yeah, it's still a little bit like, I don't know what it is, just like, some old wood furniture, from my
Mhm.
grandparents' house.
Yeah. It's antique.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit antique. Cool.
Robitussin. Yeah, that's an interesting note from Jerry.
Robitussin and vodka. Jerry, also a doctor, is an interesting character, and yeah, probably should write books, novels. I'm not sure what genre they would fall into. Sometimes I think comedy, other times horror, but they'd be interesting. Um, Stefan saying the passion fruit's gone; it's more old style now. Uh, I said old books, and now you're thinking Velacor. That's interesting because that was the comment I'd made. That actually reminded me a little bit of Velacor on the last one. So there you go. Mosstowie. Mosstowie is the next one up. 1979 Mosstowie.
I know, I think in the last tasting that you did with Angus, he talked about a lot of these old casks he just has to buy on sort of the spot market and bring in and sort of see how it is. But I have to admit that, you know, if I got this blind and I would be really excited. I think the couple of Mustowies that I've had before have been a little hit and miss depending on what wood they were
Yeah.
in. This is quite beautiful, I think.
Well, and we talk about how um, bottlings like Mosstowie, which were never distilleries, but they've been treated, as uh posthumously as closed distilleries. That just because something closed and there's demand in it doesn't always mean it's good. And some of those Loman still bottlings, like I can't remember, it was one of the other ones we've seen from Signatory, not Mosstowie, um, but something else that I've not seen in a long time that I tried and was just like, I had tried two or three and none of them were good. So, just because something's old, just because, it's not made anymore, doesn't mean that it's always going to be by definition better. But I still think this is a nice balling. Sammy, what have you got to say on this one?
On the palate now, I taste, a little bit like, like a digestive, biscuits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a little bit like, citrus, on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And honey. Yeah.
I just went onto the Decadent Drinks site to read about like this because this is, and it was a signatory acquisition for them, just 69 bottles at a natural cast strength of 42.9%. I would love to know what the story behind the label is though, because it's I don't know. It's more of a mythical beast than I think some of those other whiskeys were. You have a look at that guy. The sponge, I don't know if he's channeling a wizard or something, and looks almost like he's got claws.
No, for me, it's like, one of those old Japanese, like, ninja, like, the master
Oh,
is
there
a
you go.
ninja, like hooking onto something.
Mhm. This reminds Jerry of Towley from South Park, which is a reference I, of course, love. Anytime you can bring South Park into the equation is an interesting one. The nose has melted marshmallows now. I would say the only thing for me is that the Mosstowie just sort of it didn't get more expressive over the tasting. It kind of feels like it's gotten a little bit less. Yeah, Jeff saying it was better 45 minutes ago, but more light milk chocolate now. Side note to tonight's tasting, James says the stickers come off without leaving goo on the bottle afterwards. So there you go. I'm that one went over my head. So Tamnavulin. Shall we chat Tamnavulin here? 1979. There was some mixed feelings on this one the first time around.
I feel like I can never fully appreciate Tamnavulin unless I pour some into my glass, rinse it around, throw it on the ground, and then pour some more in just to properly season my
And then you
glass.
got to, hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Nice to see you again.
Yes. And then being that this is 39 years old, you need to keep it on your tongue for 39 seconds. I believe that's another Richard Patterson-ism. Hmm. I'm gonna pass. I don't know why. I just don't. It's not doing it for me tonight.
It's just, again, we've got a lot of old dignified stuff. And if I was nosing and tasting this blind, I don't know if I would have been able to pick out its age, just given, I think, the cask influence.
Yeah, Sammy.
Yeah, this now it turn into a lot more like like a darker wood, nose to it. When I drink it on the palate, it's like chocolate, like a mochaccino.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, it still tastes good, but it just there's a lot of other whiskey tonight we have here. It tastes a little bit better than that.
But the price is pretty good, so it does have that going for it. All right, back to Glenburgie.
Did you say this was still on the shelf?
Yeah, this is still on the shelf.
Do you accept children in payment for?
Uh,
Well, they
not
just said
currently.
they're hard workers.
I don't think the AGLC would look kindly on that, let alone customers. So,
Okay, let me know if you change your policy.
but you know what? That's funny because like it. I was gonna say this earlier. It reminds me a little bit. I mean, maybe similar casks or same parcel or whatever, but it reminds me of that. Was it James? What was it? 82 or an 83 Pulteney had these nice tropical exotic tones from the fall too. And this is even straying a little bit into those waxy notes as well.
Yeah,
Sam?
that's my alley.
Oh,
Yeah, now this one on the palate changed to a passion fruit for me.
oh, so much exotic tropical fruit,
And
creamy,
mango.
waxy tones. Um, James saying closer to the 1979 Glen Talkers. That's a challenge, James. We should hook that tasting up. The 82, yeah, I agree, was a little bolder, but the fruits on it were like very tropical like this. I think the fruits were maybe a bit brighter on that one, but great bottlings. Yeah, and surprisingly doing very well after like a gloopy sherried whiskey. Like it holds its ground pretty well. All right, Bruichladdich, 30-year-old. The nose is muted still. Palate's nice enough. Creamy, salty. There's some malt in there. I mean, this is definitely refill ex bourbon. Like it's a tired old cask. It's not getting a lot of oak character from it, but it's very drinkable. I like it, but it's it's having a hard time competing with the lineup tonight, I think.
Yeah, I almost get a lactic note on the palate now from it.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, that was the Comté, the grassy French cheese. The first time we went around, and like that yogurty kind of honey and yogurt on the nose. But yeah, the Pete's there is interesting. It's like a smoked cheddar now, maybe a bit of like chutney or quince paste. Sammy, thoughts?
I actually don't smell much, anymore. Yeah, on this one, the nose is completely gone for me. On the
Mhm.
palate, it's still good. A little bit of like like a smoked like cream cheese, like a brie. Yeah.
Do you remember back when you could get like Winnipeg cream cheese at the grocery store? It was like it was just I'm assuming that was a style of cream cheese, but yeah, you would just go and they'd fill you up a little container full of it. Miss that. So, apropos of nothing, miss the Winnipeg cream cheese. Um,
If you talk to Crystal, probably she will let you to do it.
yeah, she might. Well, I also miss Cheese Was, which was a creation she made that was quite great. A classier version of Cheese Whiz. Sammy,
Yep.
James wondered, is there a cat behind you in that thing behind your head?
No,
No?
no,
Is there ever a cat in that?
no.
No. Does it
It's not
serve
a cat.
another purpose?
No, that's just a duster.
Oh,
You
okay.
see on top of my head. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a
Got
swivel duster. Yeah.
it. Yeah. But that circle, there's nothing that comes out of that.
Oh no, no. That it used to be like well when we bought like the house, this used to be like the kids laundry, but we just use it like as a closet now. Yeah. It used to be like a laundry. So the kids can dump their laundry into the basket,
Got it.
the
Okay.
closet.
So no cats in there for
No,
James'
no,
question.
no.
Okay. Back to the whiskeys. The speed round has not been very speedy. Glenrothes, 34 year. Not Jeff, not his kids, other people's kids. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. Oh, someone's saying Kleinlich-ish. I'm guessing that was Peter saying the Bruichladdich was like that. Interesting. So how's that Glenrothes holding up?
I mean, the nose is really soft for a big sherried whiskey, but it's still beautiful. I mean, given its age, I'm not getting any sort of tannins or anything else. So assuming it's a beautiful old like second fill sherry cask from a time that things were just a little bit different.
Yeah. Sammy, final thoughts on that Glenrothes 34?
I still quite enjoy it. Yeah, for me, it's just like a chocolate, like a dark chocolate, to me now. Yeah, I still can smell, the sherry, which is good. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, not overpowering. It's actually a nice balance. Yeah. There's a nice nose to it. I quite enjoy it.
it does indeed have a nice balance. All right, I'm going to fire up the poll here and let the voting begin. Where is it here? Polls. Rare and old. All right, so we'll put that up for a few minutes. You got a little bit of time to place your vote. Now, Doug, I don't do you know what your three favorites are? Are you already and where did that plus bubble come from? So you did that and AI was doing that?
No, it's just where Zoom is at these days. Go through and do this. I can
Oh,
that I love you so very much.
wow. Who knew?
You can do a real big celebration if it's a double thumbs up.
So is that if you have AI companion on?
No, that's
Nothing
just
to do with it.
Zoom, I believe. If you've got
Really?
an
So like why is mine not I don't know if I can do this thing or the no, it's not tracking me.
maybe it's only if you have a paid account.
I do. This is a paid account. So interesting. Maybe it doesn't see me as human.
I mean,
Um,
could be.
the poll, okay, the poll is working. I was worried for a second there it was not working. I wonder if your gestures interfered with the poll for a second there. It was more than Zoom could handle.
I just appreciate all the people who are now putting up thumbs, testing it out to see if it works.
And not voting, dragging the tasting out. So Doug, per my question,
Yep.
if you were forced to choose your top three, could you do it?
Easily, yes, yes. Number one for me is the Glenburgie. I think that's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is the reason that I love Glenburgie and I chase it as much as I do. I mean, we were so fortunate. You had a couple of amazing bottles from the mid to late 90s that I think are just beautiful, but there's just a real beauty to this. Number two for me is the Glenrothes. The nose was a bit more muted, but that palate is just stunning old sherry that I think is just perfect. Number three, I think I might be a little bit off, but the Mosstowie for me actually held up a little bit better than I think it did for others. The Bunna was right in there for me as well. But just that little bit of a floral note the second time that I went back probably knocked it out of the third spot into number four. But again, I don't think there was a bad whiskey that we tried tonight.
Interesting. Cool. Sammy, have you got your
For me,
favorites?
the first one is Glenburgie. Yeah, I like that one a lot. Yeah, and the second pick for me will be the Mosstowie.
Cool. And what about three?
Uh, Probably I have to go with like the Bunnahabhain. Actually, the Bruichladdich, I actually like the taste. I like on the palate, just like the nose. I cannot really smell much on the Bruichladdich, but it's quite nice on the palate.
Cool. All right. Um, my three favorites, I mean, Glenburgie for sure. I would say for me, Mosstowie was number two. I was really torn between that and the Bunnahabhain, but the Bunnahabhain just didn't really seem to stack up or to hold up very well. And then that Glenrothes for me as well. So some similarity with you guys. The Bruichladdich is like my honorable mention. I mean, I still think it's a great bottling. Um, I love like that sort of naked style, spirit driven Bruichladdich, but yeah, Glenrothes is my number three on that. So interesting. I'll pull the poll up, see where we're at. Everyone who's still in the chat has voted. So there are the results. And yeah, the Glenburgie brushed it. Interestingly, the Bruichladdich is number two. So how about that? The youngest whiskey in the lineup finishes number two. And King of Scots, Bunnahabhain, and the Mythical Beasts all get a vote. And then for second favorite, wow, the King of Scots 50 years. So, I mean, that's the people have spoken. So I think that says something. And yeah, interesting. Everyone gets a vote in that second round as well. So no one went home without a vote. So there you go. Very, very civil, very friendly. Gents, I don't know, either of you have any final comments on the lineup tonight before we wrap?
I think really my only comment is just how exciting it is to still be able to do tastings like this. So thank you for putting it together. I think there was some really beautiful old stuff that certainly I wouldn't be able to try unless we were doing one of these. So amazing to be able to go through and really appreciate some of these old school whiskeys that we just don't see much of anymore. So
Cool. Sammy?
Yeah, same here. It's harder to find a whiskey from the 1970s.
Yeah,
Give it
it's not
a couple
often.
more years, it's going to be gone.
Well, one of the things that we are toying with the idea of doing in June is something that we were going to do before COVID and had to cancel was the Rare and Old Festival. So the only catch with that is that it would be in Calgary. So we're going to try to plan that in far enough in advance that people might be able to plan a visit and come for it. But it's something we're looking at for June for an event because we'd like to do something like this, but on a grander scale. And we would cap the number of people that could take part. And we're toying with all kinds of ideas, including having a range of things people can try, but then also a limited number of super pours. So could be fun. We'll see. There's some ideas being batted around, but I love doing tastings like this. And I especially love opening some of these old bottles and knowing that they don't all just end up in someone's garage or basement, or closet. and I don't want to throw stones at that glass house, but still, it's kind of cool. I agree. It's cool to do these lineups. So thanks all for taking part in tonight's tasting. I know this was not an inexpensive one. I hope you enjoyed the lineup. I thought it was really cool. Lots of tastings to come up. Doug, thanks for helping out. Sammy, thanks for being on the tasting tonight as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And just find a cat or something to put into that thing later. And that's
No, the cat
that's
is
a mic drop.
outside
That's a
on the
mic
couch.
drop moment that
Oh,
killing us
I feel
here.
so badly for Phil. He's trying so hard.
Yeah, I'm feeling badly for Phil too, and myself, because I can't seem to trigger these reactions. Anyway, all right, everyone. Well, thanks again for taking part in the tasting. Enjoy the rest of the evening and the week, and we'll talk to you all soon.